It's time for another episode of the Core Extra Podcast. Welcome to what is the final episode in this chapter of the Core Extra Podcast. I'm Kurt. My co-host Steve is not here. He is out on assignment. Like I said, this is the final episode of what we're going to call Chapter 1. And let me get into what that means, and let me get into what we're going to do next. I think the best place for me to start is a quick summary of when we started our podcast, how it started, and what our original vision was. We started in 2018, May of 2018, and we have done episodes since then. Try to do them weekly. And I'm going to jump right in here and tell you that the podcast went through a lot of different changes. Originally, our podcast was going to be directed toward people who worked in the movies, because Steve has worked as an extra in the movies, which is where our name comes from. So that was our plan in the beginning. But what happened there was when Steve and I got together, we did what we kind of always did. We've always done since we've been friends, which goes all the way back to the 80s. But what we would start doing is talking about things that could help the extras, and then we would start joking around and talking about a lot of other things. So we moved the podcast in that direction. Well, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about that. As you guys know, for the people who listen to us, we talk about everything from movies to music to travel to paranormal. And the show the foundation of the show was kind of a radio show type thing, where we just turned the mics on and talked about what was on our minds. We never made it really heavy. We just tried to keep it light and moving. As a result of that, we talked about a little bit of everything. And as we went along, we know we kind of lost focus a little bit. And that's hard to translate sometimes. When I say translate, I mean translate into a consistent show, because it's almost like we're going to show up and talk about anything and everything. And then it's hard for people to find us, But with all that being said, we decided to close this chapter and move in another direction. A direction that we think is truer to our original thoughts when we got together. So we'll see. I'll tell you about that, but first and foremost, I'm not going to thank everybody that deserves a thank you. I'm just going to say a big thank you to the podcast family on Twitter and all social media, but specifically Twitter, because that's where I spend most of the time. My podcast groups on Twitter, the feedback groups on Twitter, met a lot of people from a lot of places, and we're still going to be there. It's just going to be different. But I want to thank you for supporting the Core Extra Podcast like you did. I have a special shout out. I am going to name two people only because they're our local counterparts here, and I will encourage everybody to listen to them. One being the Slay Queens, the Slay Queens podcast, who I've not heard since March, so I'm not sure what's going on with them. I'm gonna have to look into that, and I'll report back on that. But let me tell you who the Slay Queens are. Slay Queens is a podcast dedicated to the discussion of true crimes with the queer community, hosted by the Slay Queen Way and Slay Queens Ash. You can find them at Slay Queens Pod on Twitter. Everybody I'll tell you here is on Twitter. And then, of course, a Cincy Fan Talking, hosted by LP himself. A Cincy Fan Talking podcast, hosted by LP. He's the host, the teacher. He reports on Cincinnati. He's a gamer, 2 times Wordle All-Star, Uno Hall of Famer, All right. You can find him at a Cincy Fan Talking. That's a Cincy, Cincy, fan talking without the G, as he likes to say. Check out both of those, and I want to thank them for their support, a little local support. Hopefully we can meet up with these guys this summer. There's a lot of things going on in Cincinnati in the summer, so hopefully we can meet up with them. And then again, like I said, I just want to thank everybody on social media who has supported us everywhere. And it's so many people to name. I don't want to name people because I'm going to leave somebody out. You know what I mean? And I really don't want to do that. So what's next for Kurt and Steve? We're going to launch our new show here. Let me back up. You will also, if you want to go back and relive some of the moments from the Core Extra podcast, you can go. You'll still be able to find us up until late June. We'll still be on Podbean, but you can always find us in the Apple Podcast or Google Podcast or iHeart, wherever you podcast, because those episodes are going to stay available forever if you want to go back. We have hooked up with Acast. Shout out to Acast. After intense negotiations, for days and days and nights, a lot of pizza and coffee, but we have hooked up with Acast, and they're going to carry they're going to host all the episodes of the Core Extra podcast, so they're not going anywhere. We don't know where we're going to put our new show. We're not sure where we're going to do that. Probably on Podbean, or maybe even on Acast, or maybe somewhere else. But when that happens, we will let you know. So what is our new show going to be? Well, after several meetings, that means a lot of lunch. After several meetings and a lot of sit-downs and a lot of back and forth, Steve and I finally settled on this. Originally, when we started doing all of this, whether it was trying to get a radio show or trying to start a podcast, our very first vision was, let's sit down at lunch, turn on the microphone, and go from there. Because Steve and I would meet about once a week, sometime once every other week, and we would go to lunch. And that's when we would that's quite frankly, we would have the discussions that you hear on the podcast. And that's what made us decide to do it. And so then trying to do another show, come up with another show that better fits us. You may remember, for those of you who've been following me on Twitter and Instagram, we talked about doing Moments of Fear, where we were going to do all paranormal shows. And we kind of scrapped that idea for a lot of reasons, because we wanted to do something that allowed us to do whatever we wanted to do. So here's what we came up with. Are you ready? Drum roll, please. Our sound effects guys, he's going to follow us, so don't worry. We're going to call it the Lunch and Laughs Podcast, because that's the one thing Steve and I do consistently. We go to lunch and we have a few laughs. We're going to record these episodes live. There's going to be no editing. No more sitting at the editing bay for hours and hours and hours. We're going to record it live. It's going to be unfiltered. You're going to hear a couple of old dudes sitting at lunch, as I like to say, jibber jabbering, And we're going to go strictly for laughs. We want to have a good time and entertain you guys while you're in your car, your office, or wherever you are. You can find us on TikTok. We're going to get more active on TikTok. We're already there. There's my TikTok page opening now. You can look us up under Kurt and Steve, or at the number 2, at 2 old dudes. You can find us there. So go look at some of our videos there. And we just kind of left on the old videos from our Core Extra days. We just left them on, and from here on we'll try to have some fun over there on TikTok with a couple of old dudes. We are not going to be doing TikTok trends, which I'm not. If they come up with some dance or something like that, Steve said he'll do it. You're not going to see me doing it. So I'll tell you ahead of time. So look, I just wanted to do this real quick. Let everybody know what the deal is. Thank everybody for all their support. Core Extra Podcast. Keep listening to the Core Extra Podcast. Like I say, it's going to be available. It's going to be there. So keep listening to the Core Extra Podcast. And you know what? We may do an episode or two. We may do another Core Extra episode. Maybe Halloween. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe Vegas. Maybe, as we say. So we're still going to continue it, but just a different chapter. So it'll be chapter 2 of the Core Extra podcast. Squeeze in a little lunch and laughs, then maybe back to Core Extra podcast. We're not sure. We're not sure we have enough energy to do 2 at the same time. No, I'm joking. Maybe we will. So look, for the last time for a while, I'm going to say, what did we learn? You already know what we learned. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks for all your support. Look forward to your continued support, and I'll see you out there on social media. Thanks.